3DO had some of the most ridiculous software out there, what is now considered ridiculous software, but at the time was cutting edge more in terms of ideology than actual gameplay. When I think back on this era, this kind of sub-era throughout the 16-bit era, the sub-era being CD-based technology era, which includes machines that I will mention later because I went on to purchase those. What's interesting about this is that I just picture this guy staring at a CD, a compact disc, and going, CD, man! And for me, what I mean by that is they're so enthralled by the capacity of this medium that they don't really consider that all it is storage space. It doesn't necessarily, well, it necessarily does not have any influence on gameplay because you're still using the same input devices. So, you know, it was a time, the 3DO, I think, really typified that sub-era in games. And the reigning mentality of the sub-era, I think, was crazy big ideas that really made a lot of sense and then just didn't pan out with gameplay. It just didn't pan out. This, of course, is when we got big into full-motion video. Yes, the Sega CD came out before the 3DO by a number of years, which we'll discuss later, but the 3DO certainly carried this mission statement with pride. And it did relatively well, actually, in Japan as a result. It came with an additional video adapter that allowed people to play, you know, photo CDs were big at the time, so the 3DO supported that. Well, they were trying to get big. They never got huge, but, you know, the 3DO supported that. Also, movies could be played in Japan if you got a special adapter. So it was kind of like an alternative to Laserdisc, which was rather expensive at the time. And for Laserdisc, you could only play Dragon's Lair, which you could get on your 3DO. Also, the 3DO's video quality was rather high compared to the Sega CD with its rather weak color palette. So the 3DO, for me, is a very fascinating machine. And for me personally, I'm able to go back to 1995. It was released in 94, but for me it was 1995 that I really looked at the 3DO, and it really got some serious displays in the Dendy shops when I was a kid. And so I was able, after my Xbox purchase, to return to this era in games that was pretty much washed over as a serious disaster. And the 3DO in 2008, 2009 eyeballs will not hold up very well. There are, like I said, a few examples of good software, Road Rash being probably chief. FIFA on the 3DO was phenomenal, and so was Madden. Believe it or not, it was 3D-ish Madden. It was a 3D playfield with 2D sprites that scaled, and it was fun because it had all the mechanics of Madden on the Genesis before it got too complicated, the way it is in my opinion now, and it's just really fun. It's also a very speedy game, fast game to play, which football is not famous for being. So it's very good in some ways. It also features some really, just really ambitious software. You know, you have a game called Hell, which features the voice talents of Dennis Hopper and Grace Jones, and the visual likeness of them both. And it's just an interesting game, published by Take-Two, back when they had their cheesy logo and before they did Grand Theft Auto, published Grand Theft Auto. So it's just kind of an interesting time in video games, and something that I think is really important to consider with the 3DO that I think a lot of people in 2008, 2009 don't really appreciate is that the 3DO represented an even closer step to arcade performance. Road Rash, you know, which I've mentioned, Road Rash, which was of arcade quality, was not a port of an arcade game. It was exclusive to the 3DO. It's different than the Mega Drive counterparts, because there's Road Rash 1, 2, and 3 on the Mega Drive. It was different than those. In fact, it was released before Road Rash 3 for the Genesis, the Mega Drive. And so it was its own thing. And it represented the arcade's transition into the home. Not just the port, not the transplant, but kind of the transition of what made the arcade into the home. And for that reason, it really is worth respecting. You know, it also brought home some of the most repulsive software available then or now. I mean, there is some really horrid stuff on there. But there is some, and even the horrid stuff is culturally significant because it says a lot of where games developers were thinking the industry might go with the advent of the CD. And now that we're almost past DVDs and getting into Blu-rays and so on, it's really interesting to look back at the 3DO specifically, because though the Sega CD included CD technology and the TurboGrafx, the Turbo Duo, also integrated CD technology, the 3DO was the first console to only feature CD technology as its source of media. That was it. It was a CD, and that was the first machine to only do that. And yeah, at $700, do not purchase this machine. But in today's currency, it's going to cost you. I got mine for $60. I felt pretty good about it, and that was several years ago. So I don't know what they run now, but there's enough on it to really warrant a look. And yeah, culturally, it's fascinating. Culturally, it's fascinating.